In this video, I want to talk briefly about taxonomy, which is how we organize living organisms in science. So taxonomy is based on naming and classifying organisms into different groups. The most common one that you're probably already slightly familiar with was developed in the 1700s by a Swedish botanist named Carolus Linnaeus. And a botanist is somebody who works with plants, as you can see from this illustration. There are two key components to taxonomy. First, there is a binomial nomenclature. That means binomial two parts, and nomenclature is the name. So each organism is given a unique two-part name that we also call the scientific name. The scientific name consists of a genus and a species. And then organisms are organized into a hierarchy or different levels. They're classified into groups based on shared characteristics. Initially, these were physical characteristics. Now, with advanced technology, we can also look at DNA characteristics. For example, here we can see a plant, and that looks, if you have some familiarity, you can say, okay, that looks like a succulent, something that can handle hot weather, and maybe it's a yucca plant. It has several common names. It's known as bear grass or Adam's needle or weak leaf yucca, but its scientific name is Yucca filamentosa, and that is the only plant, the only organism that has that scientific name. The yucca represents the genus, filamentosa is the species. If we go up one level in the hierarchy, we would go to the plant family it belongs to, which has this Latin-based name of Asparagaceae. And in that family, there are 2,900 species, many, many more, but there's only one Yucca filamentosa. So when you write scientific names, they either need to be italicized if you are printing them out using a computer, or if you're handwriting it, you underline them. The genus name is always capitalized and the species name is lowercase. You can distinguish what is genus and what is species. When you're looking at a scientific name of several different species, if they have the same genus, the assumption is that these species are more closely related. So here we have 5 different big cats: lion, jaguar, leopard, tiger, and snow leopard. If we examine the scientific name, we see that the same genus appears in 3 of them, Panthera. And so the assumption is that lions, jaguars, leopards, and tigers are more closely related to each other than they are related to snow leopards. And again, I said this is based on originally physical characteristics and now backed up by DNA analysis. Just some fun facts about scientific names. Some scientific names include the name of the person who discovered or described the species put in a more Latin form. So the Tibetan antelope, which we see over here with these lovely long horns, is the Pantholops hodgsonii, which was named for the British naturalist who discovered it, who had the last name Hodgson. So you can see how his name has been worked into the species name. Incidentally, you cannot name a species after yourself, but somebody else can put your name in there. Famous people sometimes are honored by scientific names. So this moth named Neopalpa donaldtrumpi, you can see that it has, sort of the same kind of hairstyle perhaps somebody was thinking when they looked at this moth. It reminded them of Donald Trump. So he was given that honor of having his name included in the scientific name of a moth. Scientific names can also refer to a region where this organism is plentiful, or maybe where it was first found. So the Virginia possum, which is an animal that we certainly have here, is named, or the scientific name is Didelphis virginiana. So the name of the state, Virginia, is worked into the species name. Scientific names also most often can include some feature or trait of the species, because again, we're looking, at least initially, at physical characteristics. And so scientifically, the hairy bush clover, Lespedeza hirta, the hirta part refers to the hairy stem. Hirta is a prefix or a root word that means hairy. Hirsute is another word that you might run into sometimes that's coming from that same root word. So Linnaeus classified organisms into groups based on these shared physical characteristics, and so each level is a subset of the group above. In his system, kingdom is the most inclusive. It has the most organisms, and then as you move down to the lower levels, you got fewer and fewer organisms until you were down to just one with that scientific name. So this shows the hierarchy of the Linnaean system: kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and then species. So here you would have one organism, and then in genus you'd have more. Say we have 10 different genuses, and then you might have 100 different organisms in a family and 1,000 different organisms in an order. These are just arbitrary numbers. But as you go up the different levels until you get to kingdom, then you would have the greatest number. Given an example here of our Panthera pardus, excuse me, the genus would be Panthera, the family Felidae, so your other large cats, the order Carnivora, meat eaters, the class Mammalia, this is where mammals come in. We are also part of the Mammalia class, though we are not carnivores. The phylum is Chordata, creatures that have a spinal cord and a vertebral column. And then, of course, it's in the Animalia, or the animal kingdom. This is not the only system in existence, though. Many contemporary scientists have put domains as actually the highest level, and so we have 3 domains. The bacteria domain, which includes prokaryotes that are considered true bacteria. The archaea domain, which is a different type of prokaryote known as Archaeobacteria, or just Archaea by itself, and these are bacteria-like organisms that tend to be found in extreme environments and differ in some minute physical characteristics. And then most of what we're seeing for living organisms is in the Eukarya or eukaryote domain. Then the kingdoms are organized under the domain, so we have the familiar bacteria, Archaea, protista, fungi, plantae, plants, and Animalia. Oh, I put fungi in there twice. Ignore the second time there. Other scientists have stopped using kingdoms altogether, and they have organized life into supergroups. But that's all I'm going to tell you about them, because it's a little more complicated for what we need to do. You may also see organisms organized into cladograms. There is not just one cladogram possible the way you have a unique scientific name. These are used to show relationships between organisms based on physical similarities. And so here we have a very, very simple cladogram that is going from the lamprey on one end to a gorilla on the other. As you move up the cladogram, each of the characteristic that is listed here is seen by all the organisms above it. So we have our first defining characteristic is the presence of a jaw. So lampreys do not have a jaw. Everybody else on this cladogram will have a jaw. And then as you move up, we see lungs, dry skin, hair, and then whether there's a tail or not being other physical characteristics. So cladograms will have different combinations of animals because it depends on what characteristic is being analyzed. So how many species are there on Earth that we need to come up with some type of classification for? Well, right now the estimation sits at 8.7 million different plants and animal species. That kind of leaves out some of the bacteria and other organisms. Approximately 1.25 million species have actually been named, so we really haven't named everything. We've just named a tiny piece of it. New species are identified every year. I went and looked it up, and there have been 7 new species this year up to this point. So that leaves us a lot of organisms to discover, name, to classify, to figure out exactly where they fit in this biosphere of life here on Earth. So that finishes what I want to cover in just this overview of taxonomy to help you become more familiar why we call organisms certain things.